She should never have screamed. I'm scared. And also, rude.
On the frigid morning of December 26, 1996, an elegant mansion in the heart of Boulder, Colorado, became the epicenter of one of the most disturbing crimes in U.S. history. At just 6 years old, JonBenét Ramsey, a little girl with a radiant smile and a glittering crown, was found dead in the basement of her own home, just hours after her parents reported her missing. What initially appeared to be a kidnapping quickly unraveled into a web of contradictions. Police missteps and clues that confused more than they clarified. The media plunged voraciously into the family's grief, while the world watched in disbelief as a drama unfolded that defied any logical explanation. Get ready to dive into one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries of the century. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. Who do you think killed JonBenét Ramsey? JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990, in Atlanta, Georgia. But it was in Boulder, Colorado, that her short life would take a tragic turn. Daughter of John Ramsey, a successful tech executive, and Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen and socialite. JonBenét grew up surrounded by comfort, cameras, and expectations. At a very young age, she began competing in child beauty pageants, where her angelic face and precocious poise charmed judges and audiences alike. She paraded in luxurious dresses, heavy makeup, and rehearsed choreography, a world where glamour masked subtle pressures. To the public eye, she was the image of childhood perfection, a living doll with a tiara on her head and a gaze trained for the spotlight. But away from the stage, she was simply a sweet, outgoing little girl who loved playing with her older brother Burke and dreamed of the simple joys of childhood. JonBenét's routine revolved around rehearsals, photo shoots, and travel for competitions, while the Ramsey home reflected a life of prestige and apparent stability. Yet there was something unsettling about that early exposure, a quiet discomfort that many only noticed after the tragedy. The line between family pride and exploitation seemed thin, and the sparkle of the pageants began to be questioned. Even surrounded by luxury, JonBenét was still vulnerable, a child placed in a world that demanded performance more than protection. The contrast between the glamour of her appearances and the brutal end she suffered would become a symbol of the collapse between image and reality. Her face, once printed on trophies and golden sashes, would soon appear on news posters and magazine covers, now marked by sorrow. Even surrounded by luxury, JonBenét was still vulnerable, a child handed over to a world that demanded performance more than protection. The contrast between the glamour of her presentations and the brutal end she suffered would become a symbol of the collapse between image and reality. Her face, once featured on trophies and golden sashes, now appeared on news posters and headlines heavy with grief and shock. The glittering crown, once a symbol of victory, became a cruel reminder of a stolen childhood, one cut short in an abrupt, brutal, and irreversible way. It was the early hours of December 26, 1996, when Patsy Ramsey, still dressed in the clothes from the night before, came down the stairs of her home and found a ransom note resting on the steps. Handwritten across 3 pages, the letter claimed that JonBenét had been kidnapped and demanded a payment of $18,000, exactly the amount of John Ramsey's recent Christmas bonus. The note, written in a melodramatic and bizarre tone, contained grammatical errors and strange phrasing, as if taken from a poorly written movie script. At 5:52 a.m., Patsy called 911 in a panic, reporting that her daughter had been kidnapped. Police arrived shortly after, but what should have been the start of a meticulous investigation turned into a parade of mistakes. The house quickly filled with neighbors, friends, and police officers, all walking freely through the rooms, contaminating evidence and erasing crucial traces. The ransom note itself was handled by several family members before being examined. Throughout the morning, officers found no clear signs of forced entry. JonBenét had seemingly vanished without a trace, but around 1 John Ramsey, after what appeared to be an informal suggestion from one of the officers, decided to search the basement. There, in a dark storage room, he found his daughter's body, wrapped in a white blanket, with a cord tied around her neck and duct tape still on her mouth. JonBenét was dead, and the scene was horrifying. There were visible signs of physical assault and possible sexual abuse. The cord was knotted in a complex way, and next to her body lay a broken paintbrush, used as a makeshift garrote. The murder appeared to have been carefully staged, as if someone had tried to simulate a kidnapping gone wrong. The brutality of the crime was even more shocking, given that it occurred inside the victim's own home, with no one seemingly hearing a thing. While snow continued to fall outside, covering the streets of Boulder, the inside of that mansion concealed absolute horror. JonBenét had never been taken far. She had been there the entire time, under the same roof as her parents and brother. The ransom note, the staging, the body in the basement, everything pointed to something far darker than a simple abduction. It was the beginning of a nightmare the world would never forget. The crime scene, contaminated from the very first hours, severely compromised the collection of evidence. Local police, unaccustomed to dealing with complex homicides, allowed family members and neighbors to roam freely through the house. Objects were moved, footprints were erased, and JonBenét's body was carried by John Ramsey from the basement to the main floor, destroying any potential trace evidence at the original site. Instead of securing the scene, the Boulder Police Department allowed chaos, and the truth began to slip away. Soon, the focus of the investigation turned inward, toward the family itself. The ransom note, written on paper, taken from a notepad in the house, and with a pen that also belonged to the Ramseys, seemed to have been drafted right there. Its length, unusual for a kidnapping, and its overly dramatic tone caught the attention of forensic experts, who found it inconsistent and staged. The amount requested, $118,000, was identical to John Ramsey's Christmas bonus, a detail suggesting the author had intimate knowledge of the family. Handwriting analysis proved inconclusive, though many experts noted similarities with Patsy's penmanship. Still, there was no physical evidence definitively linking any family member to the crime. The older brother, Burke, just 9 years old at the time, also became a target of dark speculation after interviews that were considered cold and disconnected. Theories multiplied rapidly: a domestic accident, a family cover-up, an outside intruder, each hypothesis riddled with its own contradictions. Meanwhile, the Ramseys closed rank. They hired attorneys, refused to submit to further police interviews, and chose to speak only to national media outlets. This behavior was viewed with suspicion by many. Why avoid investigators but talk to journalists? Were they protecting someone or trying to control the public narrative? Local detectives certainly believed so, but with no solid evidence, nothing could be done. Outside the mansion, the case had already become a media spectacle. Reporters camped outside the home, and television networks dedicated entire programs to JonBenét's death. Public opinion split between those who saw the Ramseys as wrongly accused and those convinced the killer was among them. In the midst of public outcry and tabloid frenzy, the real investigation stalled, a victim of its own failures and the lingering shadows of a crime that refused to be solved. Despite dozens of interviews, lab tests, and behavioral analyses, the JonBenét Ramsey case never reached a conclusion. In 1999, a Boulder County grand jury recommended indicting John and Patsy for child endangerment, resulting in death. However, District Attorney Alex Hunter chose not to file formal charges, citing insufficient evidence to ensure a conviction. The decision was surrounded by controversy, and, to many, felt like a missed opportunity to at least bring the case to trial. A central point of the investigation was an unidentified male DNA profile found on JonBenét's underwear. Initially, this seemed to exonerate the family member. However, forensic biology experts warned that the genetic material could have been transferred through industrial handling, possibly at the clothing's manufacturing facility. The absence of family DNA didn't necessarily mean innocence, and the presence of a third-party profile didn't automatically prove external intrusion. Beyond the DNA, other forensic elements were inconclusive. The basement window, initially believed to be the point of entry, showed conflicting signs. There were no clear fingerprints or disturbances, and undisturbed cobwebs suggested it hadn't been used. The flashlight found in the kitchen, one of the few objects possibly used as a blunt instrument, bore no fingerprints, not even those of the family. It was as if everything had been carefully wiped, or worse, deliberately staged. Over the years, the Boulder Police Department insisted the case remained open, but the lack of new evidence or leads meant it had effectively gone cold. Patsy Ramsey died in 2006 from ovarian cancer, never having been charged. John Ramsey moved away and distanced himself from the spotlight. In rare interviews, he maintained his innocence and blamed the police for mishandling the investigation. Meanwhile, JonBenét's memory continued to hover over the Boulder home like an untouched specter. No arrest warrants were issued. No new witnesses brought decisive revelation. Time, which should bring clarity, only brought more distance, and the silence that remained absolute. In any criminal investigation, it is expected that a combination of physical evidence, witness statements, and behavioral analysis will lead to the perpetrator. But in the case of JonBenét Ramsey, every path seemed to end in a dead end. The unidentified male DNA profile, found on her underwear, never matched anyone in national databases like CODIS, and the absence of a hit has to this day prevented any formal connection to a known suspect. A partial fingerprint found on the basement door also led nowhere. The killer, whoever they are, remains out of reach of the law. The intruder theory gained traction over time, especially after the Ramseys were officially cleared by the district attorney, and yet the circumstances surrounding the crime complicate that hypothesis. There were no definitive signs of forced entry, the home's alarms weren't triggered, and no neighbors reported suspicious activity that night. The scene seemed far more consistent with an internal crime, committed by someone familiar with the house, its layout, and the family's routines, someone who had time to manipulate the scene undisturbed. Over the years, dozens of suspects were questioned. One of the most infamous was John Mark Carr, who in 2006 spontaneously confessed to the murder. However, his DNA did not match the evidence found on JonBenét, and he was quickly dismissed as another disturbed individual seeking morbid attention. Public frustration grew, fueled by false confessions, conspiracy theories, and the justice system's failure to hold anyone accountable. The absence of a trial deepened the sense of impunity. JonBenét's killer may still be alive, living under a different name in another city, or perhaps, as some of the darkest theories suggest, may have died without ever facing justice. The idea that someone capable of such cruelty could have simply moved on with life is a chilling reminder of the limits of investigative systems. Today, the Ramsey home has been renovated and sold to new owners, but to many, it remains a symbol of an unresolved crime. As long as the killer remains free, justice remains absent. And JonBenét, even decades later, remains a silenced child whose silence continues to accuse us all. JonBenét Ramsey's death is not just an unsolved criminal case. It is an open wound in the history of American justice. A 6-year-old girl, brutally murdered inside her own home, on a night that should have been marked by the innocence of Christmas. Decades have passed, and we still don't know who killed her, why, or how so much evidence could vanish before our eyes. This case forces us to confront the failures of a system that, even when faced with glaring clues, was unable to protect the victim or punish the guilty. It compels us to reflect on the role of the media, on public judgment, and on the blurry line between truth and the narratives built to conceal it. Above all, it reminds us that behind every mystery lies a life that was cut short, a life that deserved more than headlines, more than speculation, more than silence. If you believe JonBenét Ramsey still deserves justice, share this video. Keep her memory alive. Subscribe to the channel, like the content, and in the comments, tell us, who do you think killed JonBenét Ramsey?